Next, we're going to talk about START and 4th R, and the city manager had asked us to give you this brief. These are two programs that provide an essential service, but in some cases they get confused, and people perhaps don't understand the full scope and scale of the programs, nor how their funding works. 4th R. 4th R comes from the 4th R in reading, writing, arithmetic, and recreation. Okay, and that gives you an indication as to what the theme of that particular program is. START is an acronym for Students Today Achieving Results Tomorrow. Again, that gives you an indication that it's results-based, academic-based. So when we break these down and we take a look at them, here's what the focuses look like. 4th R is fee-based. Parents pay a fee for their children to participate in before and after school child care program. Child care is essential to understanding this program too. It is not primarily academic based. It is not primarily government supported. It is a service provided out as a function of recreation. It does provide learning and growth in these settings, but it is not the primary purpose. Since it is child care, it is subject to the laws and regulations of child care, as in it must, everybody that performs there, everybody that's providing the service, all of our employees there, must be licensed for child care. It is year-round, with nonstop, and at several campuses throughout the area. START was designed from its inception to be grant-funded. It does provide services before and after school. It is an academic program. It is providing standards of excellence through academics. So children are taught at START. Now, they still have fun, they do other things, they do recreation, they do sports, they do other stuff, but the key to this is understanding it is an academic program that is grant funded, at one time by federal, as well as state, as well as local funding. It's year-round at selected sites, not at all sites. The schools make that decision as to where they want it to be a summer program. And it has a range of enrichment activities. Next up. This is what they look like when you take a look at the breakdown of student numbers and locations. 4th R is at about 18 sites, greater than 2,000 children attending, and those numbers can fluctuate because people register for it and then they put their kids in as they need it. Staff to student ratio, higher. It is a lower staff to student ratio than you see for START because it is a child care program. Parents pay between $75 and $565 based on the hours that they use. However, there are state subsidies that parents can receive for up to $18 a day, which in some cases can take care of the total cost for the program based on needs. Okay, and that's individual needs. The 4th R is in the Natomas, Sacramento City Unified, and Twin Rivers school districts, and you see noted for START there in Sacramento, Twin Rivers, and Robla districts. So if your child is in START, you do not pay any money into that program. And just as an added note, there are locations, some where we have both START and 4th R on campus, and we'll talk about what that does to you. Over a little bit more than 4,000 students are in START. These are some of the activities. Again, you get an indication with START, it's all about academics, and then they add in other things. Another thing to realize with START is that they do provide meals for kids, and in some sense, in some cases, for some of these kids, that may be 3 squares a day between what they get at school, between what they get in the morning from START, and between what they get in the evening from START. So it does provide a lot to those particular children. 4th R, you're looking at more kind of again, a multifaceted recreation with some academics and learning skills kind of put in. Okay. The START meals that are provided to the students come out of the school cafeterias, by the way. Okay. Hopefully you can see this. It's tough to kind of fit this in on a map, and I know the city manager doesn't like many maps, but this one shows a couple of important points. First off, you see the breakdown of the schools that are in 4th R, and you see where they're located throughout the city region. Of note, the ones that are boldened, Golden Empire, Early Wine, and Sequoia, are not within the city proper. They are within Sacramento Unified School District, but they're outside of our city boundaries. And at least in the case of Golden Empire, they're probably close enough that they're serving some of the kids in city neighborhoods. Okay? Here are the start sites. Okay? Start sites cover a little bit broader portion of the map. Again, you'll note that the ones that are boldened, in this case, we've got a total here of about 1, 2, 3, 4, 8. Okay, that are outside of the city proper, and in some cases significantly outside the city proper. For Sac Unified, that breaks down to Marshall, Erlewine, and Golden Empire. For Twin Rivers, it's Dry Creek, Frontier, Orchard, Village, and Woodbridge. For the coming school year, now we have currently 24 sites. Last year we had 31 sites. We just received word within the last 24 hours that for the coming school year, Sacramento Unified School District has selected other providers for their programs at Elder Creek, Parkway, Mark Twain, Abraham Lincoln, John Cabrillo, Hubert Bancroft, and David Lubin. And that's for the next coming school year. Now, the schools have absolute discretion to do requests for proposals from providers. We were one of the people that submitted a bid. Our bid showed true cost of what it takes to be able to run a START program at the school. And based upon that, the school districts made their own decision that they could bring in providers for a lower amount. And we'll talk more about the finances here in a minute. Okay, financial outlook. Now, we talked about that in the previous budget discussion about how we were putting $1.1 million into START and 4th R to bolster the programs. So when you break it down, here's what it looks like. 4th R, $710,000 operating deficit. $340,000 Measure U subsidy is going into that. START fund operating deficit of $410,000, and then we have a grant match. Now this is required because they are grants. The grant match goes in at $552,702. So that is a standard. We do that on an annual basis, so that's nothing new. The other increases or the subsidies that we're doing and the deficit matches out of the general fund, those are new. Okay? All right? Okay, so let's take a look at 4th R. You see on the chart that 4th R kind of varies between breaking even, being a little bit less, or being a little bit more. But in future, costs are going up. The reason why is that, first up, we have rising personnel costs. This is due to increasing benefits. This include the minimum wage going up, a host of requirements. So this is starting to become more expensive to do. And as I mentioned earlier, you've got a hard requirement of 1/14 ratio. You have a hard requirement of licensed employees providing the service. We are doing a department-wide position study. It may have some effect on this. This is kind of the worst case scenario, which is current numbers of employees, you know, that are in the positions and kind of extrapolating that out. We're also doing a fee analysis to better change the gap. We have not changed the fee structure on this in over 5 years, and that's problematic, as you can see. 4th R. Another breakout. This just kind of shows you that cost over time, and you can see it fluctuating back and forth to where it is now at well over $1 million, provided by General Fund and Measure U. And these, you know, the current one is considered to be a one-time reimbursement. Taking a look at START. Now, again, START was initiated to be a federal and state-funded, grant-funded program. So there was supposed to be no cost to the city other than what we provided for grant match. Over time, what has happened is the feds dropped out, the state grants have lowered, and the counties that were providing administrative costs have diminished some of their administrative costs. So we continue to increase this gap over time, as you see. These numbers are the result of the, will change a little bit because we just got in this information of decreasing from 31 sites to 24, so we haven't run all the expenses and everything else based on that. So so this is probably a worst case right now as well. But we don't foresee a huge change, as in we're not going to be able to match costs to actual revenues, so we're still going to have a gap. Okay? So, budgetary impacts. Again, START was initially created so that it would be fully funded and that we would not have to put anything beyond match. So over time, that cost has increased. And again, it's subject to the same issues with increasing personnel costs and all of the other things associated. As well, we also find that we've got competing programs. In some cases, you've got START and 4th R on the same campus. When that happens, you've got one pay-to-play program, one program that's free. So sometimes that works to the detriment of the pay-to-play program. Loss of financial partners. By the feds moving out of this business, we really lost a lot. And it remains to be seen. There is legislation in front of the state to try and do after-school care, and we'll have to see what happens with that. We talked about the personnel restructure that we're doing right now. That helped us a little bit in START, and we're trying to do that right now in 4th R. We'll see how that comes out probably towards the end of the summer. The benefit costs and then minimum wage has been something we've had to kind of deal with on this. Needs and opportunities. I mentioned the current legislation. If that goes through and the state increases their support, which they have not done in many years, they have not increased it since 2007, their quotient for how much grant money to give per student. That would help us out tremendously. We're working with other partners for solution. That includes the school districts. We're looking for full cost recovery, particularly in 4th R, where we can increase fees potentially, and that'll help. The facilities that are out there, which are primarily double-wide trailers, really have not received any assistance since they were first put there. So we have got to figure out a way to come up with capital improvements, and we're trying to sort through that with the districts and on our own process. Looking for new sources of revenue that might be out there to help new grant proposals, and then finally reducing expenditures wherever possible. Okay, and we'll finish with a happy slide, because I don't want to be all doom and gloom. So this makes great kids even better. They are terrific. I know anybody that's got kids in school that has worked has probably done a program like this or these programs themselves. And they become a mainstay for you if you're a working parent. But they have some increasing costs, and we are not getting the same level of support we used to from external entities, and we've got to fix that. Subject to your questions?
Thank you very much. We'll take public comment first, and then we'll come to our council members.
Okay.
We have one person signed up to speak, Anyon Douglas.
Hello. How are you doing? My name is Anyon Douglas, A&B Graphics and Designs, Heavenly Plains. My mother was a Head Start teacher for 25 years before she died. They do great work with the kids, and I'm sure 4th R does the same thing. I think they really should look into ways for funding, maybe more fundraisers actually. Might be able to raise enough money in that direction. As far as the parks and recs, the pools, they're really great. I attend the pools almost every summer, and Everywhere that I've gone, where I've been, the pools have been really nice. The only problem I would have with them are keeping them open longer. They close right after August, and it's still 90 degrees outside, at least 85 the next month. Great there. As far as programs, the Parks and Rec, I do a lot of volunteer work at the parks, mostly Wimland and park near Valley High. Like you were saying about the hiring, I was trying to basically looking for more hiring. They say they don't hire as many adults as they do youth. It's more youth-based. Sometimes I think they need that kind of strength in doing, and if they would look into that, it'd be greatly appreciated. Not just for youth, but the adults. All right. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Just public comment.
All right, Councilmember Hanson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple quick questions. Chris, I know it's come up here at the council before, Mr. Conlon, but about those sites outside the city, can you remind us why we fund sites outside of the city of Sacramento?
All happened before my reign, and I think it was, as the program started, they probably saw opportunities. They had lots of grant funding. They were a little bit more flush with cash, and they were able to do the service to the districts that were out there. So, it happened a long time ago. At one time, there were 61 start sites that were out there. And you can imagine, if you had grant funding and you had the cash, and there was any nexus whatsoever to the city in providing the service to the kids, it's probably something you'd want to do. But that was during days when we had almost double the amount of employees that were able to do the service.
Do you know for those sites outside the city how much general fund subsidy is provided to those sites outside the city?
We have a breakdown that we can share with you that shows each individual school how much.
The ones outside the city, and because this has come up on other issues, I think.
Right. I can't do the calculation right now in my head, especially since we just kind of had this announcement on the 7 schools, but we can absolutely get that to you and the other council members.
I think that would be helpful, just so that we have a good, we make an informed decision when it comes to adopting the final budget. I realize that many people depend on these sites, but there's, as the budget shows, we're looking at out-year deficits. We have other priorities, and I think we have to make an informed decision about whether we fund things outside the city that aren't necessarily being paid, taxes aren't being paid for by city residents. Using city taxpayer funds to pay for those sites outside the city seems to be a big concern. The other thing is, in the budget, I noticed that we've moved this golf loan probably from CCNL, which then went to parks, into the general fund, $8.5 million or so. Are the golf programs financially solvent? Because it sounds like they've been unable to pay this loan, and it's grown over time, and its operations and capital. And I'm just kind of worried that the risk fund, which made the loan, at least if you look at the budget, is on the hook, and that's general fund money, right, as well.
So there's an interesting history to all of that.
Before your time, I know.
Yeah, but before they were even in parks, quite honestly. But what happened was when the city was running the golf courses, there were decisions made to do these loans, and there was several loans. Now they've kind of been consolidated, but there was several loans for capital improvements, several loans for operating, bonds that were done for purchase of property, and all of that. Courses were constructed, buildings were built, all of that happened, and basically they were not getting the money into the loan. So there was a decision made to bring Morton Golf in. The beauty of Morton Golf right now is they're self-sustaining. They're actually running pretty well, enough that they can pay us for leasing of the property. And then we take literally every dime of that lease money, and it goes towards paying those old loans and bonds and everything down. Now, there was a decision made before I think any of these council members were present at one point that the operating loan would not be not forgiven, but basically frozen, that it wouldn't be paid back and that there would be no interest on it. The problem with that was that these loans were initially made out of risk, and therefore they are part of the general fund. And I know that our budgeteers can talk a little bit more on that, but now we're in a position where we can't really absolve the loan. It has to be paid back. There were already great efforts being made by Morton in paying back in paying their lease money to pay down the capital loan. Now we have to address that operating loan.
Right, if I could just add, Chris is exactly right. Morton Golf and that relationship really stabilized our golf operation on a go-forward basis, but there is no source of repayment for the operating loan. And so that's something that we've identified, that and the suspension of interest, given that the fact the source of funding of the loan was a 218 fund, is something that we're going to need to address from the general fund. And we will need to pay back interest that was suspended from 2011 to current, as well as the loan itself and any subsequent interest. And what we included in the budget was, the fact that we are working on a repayment. Ideally, any one-time funds that become available, we would look to direct back to resolve that loan because we don't have another source of ongoing funding for it.
So just a couple of quick follow-ups, because that raises a lot of questions. The amount of money that's coming in from Morton right now on the capital loan, what kind of time horizon are we looking at to be able to pay down that loan?
My understanding is it'll be paid off by 2035.
Right.
Okay, so 19 years.
Yeah.
And then on the operation side, that's 4.7 million.
Plus interest of 367 that's accrued to date that we need to make sure we
So
include
about
that.
5 million.
Mm-hmm.
And you're saying that we'd use one-time funds from the general fund in order to pay that down, like mid-year or
That's correct.
something else?
That's correct. It's a general fund operation, so that would be the resulting fund.
What were the Prop 218 funds like?
Any of our funds that contribute to the risk fund, so water, sewer, solid waste, storm drainage,
Back
CCO.
those out of the risk fund amount, because I imagine general fund departments are also paying in.
The general fund does pay in, but it's the general fund's responsibility to pay back the loan. So what we would do is look at the proportion that's
That's what I'm
218 and
asking.
make sure that so we have an idea of how much 218 funds contribute on an annual basis. So we would look at that contribution, make sure each of those funds is getting their proportion credit of interest back to the risk fund so that we keep it whole for each of the 218 funds.
But you don't know the proportion of 218?
I don't have it off the top of my head, no.
Okay. So it's possible that the general fund is only a portion of that. And
It's about 70-30, general fund and
30
218 funds into the risk fund,
Which is the 30?
the 218 funds.
Okay.
Yeah.
So about 30% of that has to be repaid, and that's the amount of the one-time funds, and we would...
Well, we would advocate on the risk fund side that all of it needs to be repaid, because one of the amounts due on the as the way we account for the risk fund includes that as a due to the risk fund. And if we short the risk fund, that loan on the general fund side, we'll have to make up for it in higher contributions from the general fund to get the risk fund to where we need it to be on the general fund
I was going
side.
to say, can't the general fund just go on a payment plan?
The general fund could go on a payment plan if we choose to do it that way.
Okay.
Makes it more complicated.
All right.
Let me just add on this topic. I wanted to make sure we brought this to the council's attention because, in effect, it's another unfunded liability that the city has. And I just think that from a policy standpoint, going forward, we shouldn't see the risk fund as some place to make easy, convenient loans. That's not what it's for. It's, as its name suggests, for risk, for emergencies, for those liabilities that the city faces every year and that we never know when the next one's going to crop up. So this was a decision made a long time ago. I'm just recommending to council that, in general, that practice not be repeated in the future.
Well, and I guess my final point was that if we used this loan to acquire property or other assets that are now being, I thought you said capital?
The capital loan is actually being repaid, so
Okay.
it's not an issue. It's the operating loan that paid for operations. So
Do we need to own these golf courses? I mean, could they be acquired by a nonprofit for that amount? And then
we do own the golf courses. The issue with
do we
selling.
need to? Do we need to own them? I guess is.
Are
does
you
this-
asking, do we need to have the golf courses, or do we need to start running them?
They're run privately. It doesn't sound like we need to own them.
Right.
Part of the issue is that some of them still have remaining debt. So to the extent that we haven't repaid the debt, we can't sell the course. The other issue is that some of our courses, like Bartley Kavanaugh, have an arrangement with the the district that it's associated with, and it's used for other purposes other than a golf course for drainage, and so it can't be sold. And so you have to look at each course one by one, and I believe we evaluated selling the courses as part of the entire transition of the Gulf Fund, and it did not make sense in most cases to alleviate the city's ownership of the asset.
But if there's a drainage, that's a Prop 218 use, no?
No, we have the way we are using another institution's property as a golf course, and they use it for drainage, so we can't sell it because of the way that it's currently used for drainage.
But can't we get credit from Prop 218 for that use?
It's not ours to get credit for.
Okay. I'm confused, so we'll have to talk about it more later.
Sure.
Councilmember Guerra.
Great. Thank you. I just wanted to say I appreciate you trying to make sure that we're funding both Fourth R and START and doing what we can to be providing those resources. I mean, the issue of having after-school programming is not just so much also for the children. I mean, obviously having them with early education opportunities after the school and before the school helps address our larger issue of, how do we get them in positive environments, but also the issue of many parents rely on these programs so that they can work a full day. I mean, so there's a double whammy here that we're trying to get at. I do want to go back to a point that you said about some of the schools being close enough to the city boundary, and they may be serving City of Sacramento students. I know if you live in College Greens or Glenbrook and you go to high school, you won't go to Hiram Johnson, you go to Rosemont. It's still within the Sacramento City Unified School District, even though it's right outside of the county. But our school district boundaries don't exactly overlap with the city. So I want to make sure that we're serving City of Sacramento families who are paying into the services that we provide too. But I want to make sure that we continue those services for Fourth R and START, and thank you for keeping those.
Very welcome.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Ashby.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to attempt to get a couple of my questions answered, but if it starts to get too deep, I'm happy to meet with you offline a little bit before this comes back for adoption. But I'm pretty concerned, and I would say that my concerns run along the same line as Councilmember Hansen's. It feels to me, and I know we've sort of known that this was coming, but I think we need to have a larger conversation about START and Fourth R, because what I notice is a lot of times here, people talk about Fourth R and START as if they are the only after-school programs that exist on these campuses, and what they really need to understand is some of what you explained today, that we're actually applying in some instances to be a provider, which means if we pulled out, others would be the provider. And at least as long as I've been here, there have not been instances where we left families high and dry. We finished out years, we put money towards districts like District 6, and then other groups took over and came in. And one of the problems I have seen in looking at this is that there are other programs that are free to the families. And so Fourth R is pretty expensive. If you're not a family that receives subsidy, you have a couple of kids in that program, it gets pretty expensive pretty quick. So if there are other programs not provided by the city at all, but other entities that are providing programs that are free, we're competing from a disadvantage point. All of that being said, I think the bulk of the Fourth Rs a big chunk of them are in my district. But that relationship with Natomas Unified has worked better, quite frankly, than with some of the other school districts, because I've seen over the last few years other school districts come to us and ask us to continue to provide service without paying us. And I just don't think we can do that. I think if that's the model for after-school programs, then we have to get out of that business. Because how do we, in good conscience, continue to pay for something that the school district and or the county is supposed to be reimbursing us for? It's frustrating enough that the state hasn't upped the ratio since inception, and so we've had to fill that gap. But I just think we need to have a broader dialogue so that people don't think that we're abandoning after-school programs and childcare, but rather that we're trying to figure out if this is something that makes sense for the city of Sacramento to be in business in doing this. And I particularly think it does not make sense when you're outside of the city and we're subsidizing programs. And the last number I heard was 800,000, that we were subsidizing to the tune of 800,000, or that the county at least owed us $800,000 annually that they hadn't been paying us in terms of subsidy for the START programs happening outside the city limits. I would think taxpayers would be outraged by that. We just raised Measure U funds. We're trying to, you asked about how to get more kids jobs. There's $800,000 worth of jobs. I can tell you, you went through your volunteer hours. I don't know how many of them are mine out of the district. I'd be willing to bet it's a darn lot, or really a lot. And I know that I double pay for L&L crews out of Natomas specific funds. So I know I'm doubling up on how many kids are getting hired, and everybody up here is asking about how they can get more funding to do some of those things that are happening in Natomas. 400 youth doing volunteer hours, and these crews out there giving it their all and getting awards and winning statewide programs. You can't do it when you're bleeding out $800,000 that the county should have been paying to us. So I just want to make sure that we're having a conversation that takes the lid off of this moving forward and allows us, because I think some of the line of questioning that Councilmember Hansen was presenting is extremely important moving forward. We have to make better decisions on these things. Of course, we all want after-school programs. We all want to make sure there's childcare. Nobody wants to leave any family in the county or out of the county high and dry. So we're not pulling out of anything mid-year. We're not going to do anything like that. Of course, we would never do that. But we also can't be in a business that we shouldn't be in if it's costing us in other areas. It's just frustrating to watch you give two halves of a report, where one half is really desperate for funding and the other half we've been subsidizing, and you're even presenting subsidies again this year for those programs that we're voluntarily going into knowing we're going to have to subsidize them partway through the year, when there are other private entities or other nonprofits or other lower cost solutions for folks. All of that said, it's not that I don't think we should do it. I think we just need to have a really careful conversation about it and make sure that, that people are fully informed on, if we don't do fourth R at a school, what are the other options? Because I know everybody up here is going to say, I don't want my school to not have an after-school program. But often that's not the case. I mean, we have pulled out of fourth R in the past in other schools, and just another program has come in, whether that's Target Excellence or ACEs or whatever it is, but there's programs all over Sacramento that are subsidizing in. And it looks like, I think last year, you said there were 30,000 volunteer hours. Mm-hmm. It looks like just under 9,000 of those hours came through that guy right there sitting behind Shannon, the Parks Department in Natomas with youth. So that's roughly a little under a third of your volunteer hours came out of one district. That's what you can do with a very small amount of money, working with a whole lot of kids and a parks crew that's willing to take it on. I think it's worth noting.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Before I go to Councilmember Chenier, I have a question maybe for the city manager and Chris as well. So, oversimplified, how many schools that are part of the START? What's the total number?
Of START?
Yeah.
24, sir.
And then how many for the art program, fourth art?
Fourth R, I think we have 18.
18.
Yep.
And then how many schools are outside of the city?
In the case of fourth R, we have 3 that are outside the city. In the case of START, I believe the number is 8.
Okay. And I guess for the city manager, and we have 7. You have an announcement of the 7. Explain that really quickly again.
We had 31 schools that were in START last year. There was a request for proposals that came out of Sacramento Unified. We responded to that with our bids at real costs, what it actually costs us to run the programs there. And Sacramento Unified selected other providers at 7 of their schools that we had previously provided START.
Of the 31?
Of the 31. So that dropped us down to 24 for the new school year.
Got it. So I guess, City Manager, what would it take for us to get to a point, I mean, bottom line, that the programs that are outside the city, that we would no longer have to run those or be responsible for? What would it, I guess, yeah, that's what.
Well, the simple answer is that the school districts, the respective school districts, would need to provide, or would need to find other providers for those programs outside our city. And that's what Mr. Collin is referring to in terms of SAC Unified just had an RFP process where in that RFP process they advertised for other providers, and they got them.
Yep.
These are nonprofits that just frankly have a lower cost structure than we do. We try to sort of offset that by several years of underpaying our employees and not giving them the benefits and pay that they were entitled to under the contract. Council is aware of that. So what Mr. Collin is pointing out is when we proposed for those 8 sites, we weren't competitive. Our cost structure was much higher. So that's what needs to happen. The school districts need to find other providers for at least those sites that are outside the city, and they're moving even beyond that because our cost structure is so high.
So my question is, if there's 8 left on the START side and 3 or so on the 4th R, what would be the time horizon to incur? I'm not saying the school district is not. I know you've been meeting with Superintendent Banda and others. So I know we're making strides toward that. But if we said we want to get there by the next fiscal year, would that be a reasonable target? Or it feels like the onus is a little bit more on them than it is on us, or is that not correct?
Well, I have been meeting with the superintendent. Mr. Conlon has been meeting with their staff, and we have been kind of slowly trying to transition these programs. It only makes sense to change administration of the programs with the beginning of a school year.
Yeah.
So we really shouldn't do that sort of arbitrarily throughout the year. They've done the right thing. They advertised here in the spring. They got proposals, and they've made decisions for the beginning of the school year. For us to get out of those others, we should give the school district a year's sort of...
A year plus a school year. So from our standpoint, 6 months plus the
What I'm
school
saying
year.
is they should start now to plan for other providers in the fall of 17. Or 17, 18.
Got it, yeah.
That would be the only fair way to do
Got
this.
it. Okay, great. Thank you. Councilmember Chenier.
Thanks, Mayor. A couple of things, Chris. One is I want to start and go off track a little bit, but just thank you for the work you've been doing around Mangan Park. I think that's been a major issue for us, and I think you're on top of it as much as anybody can be. So I just want to say thank you to you and your staff for that. It's been a difficult situation, but hopefully on the way to resolution. And I know that we'll be making some decisions soon about what to do with the structure there and how to move forward on it. I also want to just note, and I've talked to the city manager a couple of times on this, this is your first half of your presentation when we look at the Summer Night Lights program piece of it that's in Oak Park. I just want to make sure we have some flexibility with those dollars. We have a relatively new person at the community center. She wants to do a lot of outreach to some communities that aren't participating, and I want to make sure that we can work with them and with a community advisory council that I believe she's going to put together about how to spend those extra funds to get the biggest bang for the buck. So whether it's summer night lights or something else, really want to judge how many people we can reach in the community with those funds. So want to put that on record. And then the third thing is, and this is just a placeholder for a later time, is I do want to have a discussion about kind of the need that young people have in this community and where we are in fulfilling that need. So there's lots of things, and Mr. Jennings talked a little bit about 800 young people applying for jobs and we having 85 of them. There's a lot more that I think we can be doing, some within the structure that we have and some other things that we may want to put on the table. I don't know if Measure Y will pass or not, but that's a potential funding source to do more for kids. But I also want to talk about how we do what we do, and I think you've brought up a couple of examples with both 4th R and START. How do we use 4th R not just as a recreational program, but also as a learning program? And what's the framework that we're using to make sure that we're not just rolling out a basketball or a soccer ball or whatever, and kids are playing, which is a great thing, but how do they learn from that? Or a basketball.
And just to allay any concerns, that you know, in my presentation, I was trying to stress the fact that one program has a mandate of academics, the other program is under a recreational theory, but absolutely there is learning during that. I mean, the kids do their work.
Which one's mandated on the academic?
START. Yes, sir.
Which one?
START is academically based because of the grants and what it's supposed to do. 4th R is recreation based because it's a child care program. However, there is learning involved with it.
Right. Well, and frankly, I would argue on START too. There's an academic component to it. There's also an enrichment component.
There sure is.
I actually helped write the legislation for the state that started that, so I'm pretty familiar with it.
Write it?
I helped write the legislation when I worked in the legislature. So
when was that?
When was that?
How long ago was that?
95.
Ooh, okay. Ooh.
You were 3. Yeah. So it was Torlixon, Lockyer, and Deborah Ortiz. They each had their own bill, and that we helped write the bills. Anyway, so what I would love to do is sing, and when we did the analysis of kind of where we spend our money, we noted that from my office, we noted we spend about 18% on high school kids, which is a huge need right now. That's probably gone up with gang involvement, the gang prevention grants that we've done. But with all those things, I'd like to kind of place a bookmark for a discussion about what we're doing, what we could do, what the framework is that we're using, and how we're moving forward with young people in the city.
I think that's great, and we welcome that. You know, in my prior career, the credo was always to reinforce success, right? And there's a lot of successes out there. We just have to start putting more resources into them.
Thank you.
All right, I think we're done. Councilmember Ashby?
Yeah, just one last thing. I wanted to, first of all, support what Jay's saying to you, that I think that the Oak Park, Del Paso Heights, and Mac Road programs, I think they need to be flexible also so that they can do what they think is best suited for their districts, because it's a little bit different. And so I just want to make sure that you have support from at least one other council member on that. And then I think it's also worth noting that I agree with Jay that we need to do more for the kids, and you know, we'll have clarity on Measure Y, but I think either way, I heard this council make a pretty big commitment to it. So one way or another, we need to take some of those funds and put it towards moving these programs forward for youth and employment. And then I just wanted to single out one person. Frank, would you just stand up for 1 second? I think this is worth noting. So Frank is the supervisor for the parks area in my district, and I have a lot of parks. It's just the way it was built out. It wasn't my decision. I inherited it. It's really difficult to take care of that many parks, especially in a new area. And I, came up with some ideas around volunteers, and we hired a volunteer coordinator with some Natoma-specific money. But none of that matters if you don't have a person in parks who will help you with that. And I just want to tell you what this employee did for all of us, for the city of Sacramento, right? On top of running a great crew, winning all kinds of awards, he led 3,600 volunteers last year to over 8,500 volunteer hours in our parks alone in North Natoma. So thanks, Frank. That's a great crew.
All right. Great news, the meeting is adjourned. The not quite as great news is we'll see you back at 6.